everybody, and welcome to our final lecture for 11355 Education for Diversity. I've enjoyed teaching you all, and I'm kind of sorry to see it go in that sense, but in the sense of 2020 has not been the best year for any of us, I think, and it's certainly been a different experience doing everything online and a huge amount of work moving everything online. So in that sense, I'm not sorry to see the end of this semester at all, but obviously it's been great teaching you all. I'd like to start by acknowledging this beautiful country that we live on. It is a lovely time of year. Really love spring. Spring and autumn in Canberra are just beautiful. We've got obviously slightly warmer weather and all the bounty of life. Everything's springing into life. It's really beautiful in the gardens and so on. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that have shown us how to manage land in such sustainable ways. And I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. And I would also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people engaging with this presentation. Now then, today we're looking at the NCCD, or the nationally consistent collection of data on students, school students with disability. It's a huge mouthful, which is why we prefer to say NCCD. So we're going to talk about what it is, why we do it, what processes are involved in schools, and how it's relevant to you as a teacher. And you might be thinking, well, surely this is something that the inclusion department will deal with. But actually, you as a teacher need to know a lot about the NCCD because you are responsible for collecting data. So it's really relevant to you as a teacher. And it's something that happens once a year. The Australian government collects information on students with disabilities in schools once a year. And the NCCD is about students who meet the criteria for the DSE, or the Disability Standards for Education. You remember those are from 2005. Actually, the standards are reviewed every 5 years, and submissions for the 2020 renewal have just closed. But the original standards, Disability Standards for Education, were organised in 2005. They're frequently known just as the standards, and the standards clarify and elaborate the legal obligations of education authorities and providers across the whole of education. So preschool, kindergarten, primary school, high school, vocational education and training, and higher education. The standards seek to ensure that students with disability can access and participate in education on the same basis as other students. And that's that phrase that keeps coming up, that all students have to be able to participate in education on the same basis. Now, for the purposes of the NCCD, students with disability includes students who are diagnosed and those who are not diagnosed, because the DDA says that a person with a disability can be a person who has an imputed disability. So they don't have to be diagnosed. Now, I know when I first came to Canberra and we were having the University of Canberra, and we were having a conversation with the inclusion department, and I was saying, can you impute a disability? Because even by university level, some people may just not be aware that they have a disability, such as dyslexia or something like that. Anyway, the people here looked absolutely horrified at the notion of somebody imputing a disability, and yet it's not unusual in school. Now, I'm hoping that we can just watch a video about the NCCD, and just reorganizing my screen so that hopefully you will be able to see my screen in just a moment. Sorry about this. Share application screen. It's a bit of a difficulty because, let me see if I can do it. I think I can only do it by sharing this one, but then going here. All right.
All children deserve the best possible education. Education that provides opportunities for children of all abilities to reach their potential. The nationally consistent collection of data on school students with disability, or NCCD, is a fair and consistent way for Australian schools to collect information that reflects the support or adjustments being provided for students whose learning is impacted by disability. These adjustments will be different for each student, but might include things like specialised technology, specialist equipment, building modifications, or a differentiated approach to curriculum delivery. The Commonwealth Student with Disability Loading is now based on the NCCD. To include a student in the NCCD, schools must have documented evidence in accordance with NCCD criteria. It's up to schools to decide how they'll do this, but there are some simple tools and templates available on the NCCD portal to support schools through the process. It's important that schools understand which students should be included in the NCCD and the evidence needed to support their inclusion, because it helps to ensure that funding will be allocated fairly, based on need. This means that schools and school systems will have access to appropriate funding support based on the adjustments that have been provided in the previous 12 months. And it means that all students receiving adjustments because of disability will get the education they deserve.
Okay, so we'll go back to our file. Yeah, so that's this sort of NCCD propaganda video, if you like. That's a little bit of information, brief introduction to the NCCD. Okay, so the NCCD counts the number of school students receiving reasonable adjustments due to a disability. So it includes the category of disability that best describes the child's difficulties. And one of 4 categories is chosen by the school team to reflect the child's greatest area of need. So that might be physical, cognitive, sensory, or social and emotional. The NCCD count also includes the level of adjustment. So the first thing is the category, the second is the level of adjustment. And again, we've got one of 4 levels being chosen by the school team to reflect the type of support that the child requires. So we've got quality differentiated teaching practice, which, as I've mentioned, is almost a defunct category now, in the sense that the expectation is that people will just differentiate as part of good practice. But that is the sort of category 1. Then we have supplementary adjustment, substantial adjustment, and extensive adjustment. So it's supposedly, or aims to be, an accurate national picture of students and the level of support that the school provides to them. It doesn't ask for any identifying information of the student. All it asks for is the number of categories within these number of students, within these categories. The categories on the left-hand side here in the slide, and you know, these fit with the categories of impairment in the DDA and the DSE. And then you have to say how many students in that category get quality differentiated support, how many get supplementary, how many get substantial, or how many get extensive support. That information is then sent to the government from each school. So if we look here at the slide, the row which shows cognitive disabilities or impairments, we've got 18 students, and they might be things like dyslexia or dyscalculia or mild global learning disabilities. And these students are being given quality differentiated teaching. Like I said, if the teacher's operating within a UDL approach, it might just be thought of as good teaching. But then we might get supplementary support. Substantial adjustments require substantial changes to the curriculum. So at that stage, we're changing expectations in relation to how much content students are expected to learn. And that might be for some, but not all students. Well, if they have extensive impairments, which might relate to something like autism, Down syndrome, traumatic brain injury, or whatever. But again, there is a huge amount of variation within those categories of impairment. So yeah, we have to think about the individual very much rather than the labels. Extensive support is going to include a different curriculum. People will have support with them all the time in class and so on. So we will go on to talk about those in more detail. So schools have to collect evidence that they're doing things. You have to actually show that you're doing things. And the NCCD, schools are randomly inspected. So you have to keep that data. And this is where you as a teacher comes in. Each and every teacher in a school has to keep a record of the evidence that they've collected. So where is your evidence? Well, it's in your planning documentation. And here are some of the things that might be considered evidence for the NCCD. So we've got adjustments to teaching, noted on your unit and your weekly or term planning. You've noted that you've made some adjustments. You might have adjusted timetables or staff timetables. That's going to be more at the kind of leadership level than the individual teacher level. But record of educational and or social and emotional interventions provided. You could be doing that on a daily basis, providing particular interventions for particular students. Any kind of individual personalised learning plan, IEPs, ILPs, all the things we talked about a couple of weeks ago. and behaviour plans, anything like that, transition plans, they will count as evidence of adjustment. All these things here, records of meetings to plan, records of advice or conversations with the student or the family. And with respect to that, even if you try to contact the family or carer and they do not respond, you need to report that you have tried to contact them. You have to write down that you've offered a student extra time in a test, even if they refuse it. You still have to write down that you've offered them the support. So this is the kind of evidence that schools and individual teachers have to provide, and collecting it is not a small job. And so a large part of the job of an inclusion department is now taken up with providing this information. And a good inclusion department will make sure that their teachers are collecting and recording this information from the start. You need to be told in advance what the procedures are for doing this and for recording your adjustments, because getting to August, usually done in August, or it certainly was when I was at school, getting to August and getting told you've got to produce, a year's evidence would be a bit of a disaster. So, yeah, it's really important to make sure you're doing it as you're going along, otherwise it's just huge. And some teachers are more amenable to the task than others, but everybody's got to do it. So here's a few more examples of some other evidence of adjustments that you might include. I'll just let you read through that list. So you can see it's a pretty comprehensive list of examples here that show that we're looking at teaching interventions, but you also have to, and as a tutor, you will certainly be involved in this. You have to look at anything around personal care, health care, not just the curriculum modifications or anything you might make. But healthcare issues that you might have to consider, anything to support individualised learning, such as visual supports or augmentative and alternative communication. So it's a complete range of things. Anything at all that you do to support a student, you need to be recording. And so we've got the different phases of the data collection. That's the kind of data that you need to collect. How do you go through it? Well, you start with the planning process. As I've said, you've got to plan the collection well in advance. The better planned it is, the more staff are kind of on board with it, because as I've said, some teachers are really resistant to this process. So your inclusion staff really need to tell you at the start of the year, this is in the planning stage, what exactly you need to do. And it's even better if you get provided with a template or a database into which you just pop in your support for each student. The next stage after planning is obviously just to implement the collection of the data through the year, so that that's when you're gathering all your evidence. And at the end, it goes to the principal to be validated, and the principal has to sign off on it. It is a legal document. So if you have said that you have done these, you have implemented these adjustments, you really do have to have done that, because it is a legal document. And part of that is because some of this is related to funding. not quality differentiated teaching, but when you get into the more intensive support, it is related to funding. And we have moderation processes every year. The inclusion staff in schools have moderation processes similar to the sort of moderation for BSSS, I suppose. But where we go and we talk about, would you say this is extensive adjustment? Would you say, you know, the different levels of adjustment to ensure that this process is fair? Because obviously if it's tied to funding, then we need to make sure that it's a fair process. Whichever school you're in, you're going to get the same kind of adjustments. It's going to be recorded in a broadly similar way, by which I mean, you know, if you're going to be said that you've got a cognitive impairment and you need extensive adjustments in every school, it would be the same for every school. And that's part of this legal document. So the principal signs off to say, yeah, I guarantee that if you audit me tomorrow, all my staff have evidence to say that they've been doing these adjustments, and you will see these practices in place. So this is sort of how we work through those steps. First of all, determine, is there an adjustment or not? Then we determine what level of adjustment it is, what broad category is it. So the level of adjustment is the quality differentiated teaching through to the extensive. The broad category is the physical, cognitive, social, emotional, and so on. And then, so these are the steps we go through, record the data, and then principal verifies it. So let's have a look first at step 1. I'll just let you read that. Really, first and foremost, the question is just, is there any adjustment? Are you making any adjustment for any students? Step 2 is then, okay, we know that there's an adjustment. What level is it at? And here we've got the 4 levels. And let's look at those levels in a little bit more detail now. I'll just give you a minute to read this slide. So here the point is that what you're doing really is ensuring that you're monitoring particular students. So they have some level of impairment, but it's not dramatically impacting on their lives on a daily basis. They may have had a greater level of adjustment in the past, but for the period that you're reporting on, you know, for whatever reason, they don't need such intensive support. And so really it's a monitoring process that goes on there, and quality differentiated teaching practice. So let's look at some very specific examples here. So differentiated approach to curriculum delivery. Again, like I say, that's just good teaching, having a differentiated approach. Personalised learning that's implemented without drawing on additional resources. And by that, really what they're talking about is funding. Monitoring of a student who has a health condition or a mental health condition. So that might be something like if somebody has an ongoing situation of school refusal, even, that could be something that might require minor adjustments for students. whole school professional learning for the management of asthma or diabetes, or the other thing is what to do in cases of my mind's just gone blank, anaphylactic shock. You might be trained, you might train your whole staff to manage that situation. And any building modifications where as soon as the building's modified, the student is good to go and you know, just join in with everything on a completely join in fully with all acts of schooling as soon as the building's modified. And these are the some examples of the kinds of students who might be monitored and who might be receiving quality differentiated treatment. You can see those on the right. Okay. Supplementary adjustments go a little bit beyond QDTP. So these are always, whereas I would say often QDTP, as I've so many times said, it's just good teaching and it's something you might do for all your students, just ensuring that you're meeting them at the right level. But supplementary adjustments go beyond that because they're designed to address the particular nature and impact of a particular student's impairment. So there's an assessed need that at some times, some specific times, you know, this student is going to need some extra support that goes above and beyond just differentiation. And the kinds of things that you might get here on the left-hand side, there's some examples of adjustments that might be included in this category. Let you read through those. And you can see that there's room for a little bit of, you know, is it QTDP or is it, sorry, QDTP, or is it, you know, which category is it going to go on? Because there is some overlap there. There are, they state here that, for example, modifications to ensure full access to buildings are, you know, if the access is done and that's it, then it might not be considered as supplementary. It might just, you know, it's done and the student can access all the buildings. So it's going to depend on the circumstances a little bit. Most of these students will be accessing, well, the characteristics of the students are that they will be accessing or working at or close to the expected year level relative to their age. But they just might need a little bit of extra specific care to ensure that they're fully participating in academic and in the academic and social life of school. And they might need a lot of repetition, perhaps, or they might need a highly structured environment. Remembering, of course, that it's not just about the cognitive level. All of these may be at the personal care level, safety issues, social interaction, all of these issues. It's not all about the cognitive. We move a little bit further to where support is a little bit more intensive onto substantial adjustments. So these go beyond supplementary adjustments, and these are designed to address more significant barriers to participation in school life. I will give you some examples of these. So just read the slide on the left-hand side. I'm not sure if you can read the last one, but I'll give you a minute. Okay, so these are, you can clearly see for students who really do need to access, you know, they need real support to access and participate in learning programs, possibly with mobility, possibly cognitively. You know, you're having to significantly modify materials in some way or another, and they will require curriculum content at a different year level to their same age peers. And of course, if you think about that concept, you know, in some schools, some students might, simply because of the levels at which the average is going to be different in every school. So the level at which students are working is going to be different in every school. So what we perceive, you know, in one school which has got a lot of students who are working at very high levels, you're obviously going to be doing more modifying for some students than if, you know, those students were in another school where more people were working at a lower level. But you still have to think about what's the expectation on average for students working at this level. It does get a little bit sticky. It gets sticky because some schools would look at other schools and say, well, you're not even doing anything. You don't even have to do anything for that student. So why would you get funding? Because you don't really have to modify anything like as much as we have to modify because of the differences between the bulk of our student body and particular students. It's complicated, a bit complicated. Sorry, and I can just see that the slide has come over the top there. You will be able to read them in the main. I'll put up the slides separately, but I think you get the idea. Extensive adjustments are the highest level of adjustment. Highly individualized support is needed all the time in order to help the student or ensure that the student can participate in the academic and social life in the school. Now, again, that may be in certain categories, but not in others. The adjustments are highly individualized, comprehensive, and ongoing. And for these students, all of their courses will be modified in some way or another. You know, they'll probably be receiving intensive instruction, but of course, again, it may not be in the cognitive area. It could be social or physical. We have many children who are very much capable of working at the same level as their same age peers, or even above that level, and even well above that level. But they may need help with dressing, with using the bathroom, with movement, with communication, different modes of communication, and so on. This help's not provided by the teacher, that kind of mobility help and dressing help and bathroom use and so on. The student will have a designated support person to assist them with those things. I'll just let you read through that slide. Sorry, read through the next slide. Okay. Now, in theory, step 3 is then determine the broad category of disability under which the student fits, but it's really done in combination with step 2, obviously. If you're thinking about the levels, then you need to be thinking about, you know, what are you giving support for their physical needs or cognitive or sensory, it's not like you're going to just completely divorce the level of support from the category of disability. But what does happen here at step 3 is that when you've gone through your list of all the supports you're offering and all the levels that you're offering it at, you now need to identify the broad category of disability under which the student best fits. So it can be really complicated because, as mentioned, students could have a range of disabilities that stretch across all of the categories. And some impairments, such as something like dyspraxia, which is a condition which may not be very debilitating at all. It may be a minor thing. It's usually seen as a physical issue because it affects motor skills or movement skills, affects fine motor movement, affects things like handwriting, although people also have gross motor issues as well, so things like skipping or high jump. But sometimes it's also a planning issue, both in terms of planning movement or in terms of cognitive planning. So, starting to plan an assignment. Some people just with dyspraxia would really struggle to plan an assignment, for example. And some students with dyspraxia can have sensory difficulties. So if you're, for example, if your eyes don't seem together in kind of a binocular vision sort of way, bright light can be particularly unpleasant for kids. So really, when you're deciding, well, which category does this student fit under, they may, as I say, have issues across all of the broad categories. You've got to look, what is the category's got to be about the student. In which of these categories is the individual most affected in a school context? And finally, the last step is just recording the data. So you've got there your categories of students, you've got your levels of adjustment, and you've just got to basically put all of that into a table and send it off for government approval. And as I said, the principal will validate that it's a legal document. So yeah, you've got to be able to, when the inspectors say we want to come and see your processes and check that these things really are happening, you've got to make sure that they really are happening. So big responsibilities for teachers in the process there. And we are going to learn a lot more about this in our tutorial when Peter Fock comes. He was involved with the setup and the creation really of the NCCD, and Peter's going to talk to us and tell us a lot more about it. Thank you for listening.